13 Traits of People Who Have Suffered Deeply. Carl Jung. What pain leaves behind. Some wounds don't leave scars on the body, but they quietly shape the soul. This video explores the invisible pain we carry, the masks we wear to survive, and the deep emotional defenses we mistake for strength. Drawing from the insights of Carl Jung, we explore how trauma hides behind independence, empathy, silence, and even perfectionism. You'll learn why some people appear strong but are quietly breaking, and how true healing begins when we stop trying to be invincible and start allowing ourselves to be real. If you've ever felt like you're carrying too much, loving too carefully, or living behind a wall you didn't build, this is for you, because you're not alone. And healing isn't about becoming stronger. It's about giving yourself permission to feel. Stay with us. Not all pain screams out loud. Not everyone who is hurt cries. Not every wound bleeds. There are pains that make no sound, that leave no marks on the body, but silently erode the soul from within. Some people learn to smile just to ease the worries of others. They stitch up their inner tears without anyone ever knowing. They may look fine, but in truth, they are struggling not to fall apart. Carl Jung once said, "Pain that is not understood does not disappear, it hides, then turns into behavior. It makes a person cold, controlling, or overly strong, and gets them misjudged by others." The sad part is, hardly anyone notices. Instead of asking, "What are you going through?" they only ask, "Why are you like this?" Some people live among many, yet always feel left behind. They learn not to need anyone, just to avoid rejection. They choose silence because they were once ridiculed for speaking their truth. They withdraw because they've stepped forward too many times and been hurt. That kind of pain is not weakness. It is a part of a soul that once fought to survive. And when you start to feel that tightness in your throat or need a deep breath just to carry on, don't be surprised. That's your soul recognizing itself in these words. And that recognition alone is already the first step toward healing. Old wounds, new masks. Some wounds happen so early that we no longer remember when they began. We only know that at some point, we stopped being ourselves. We became guarded, cautious, lost our softness. Trust was replaced by vigilance. Innocence gave way to a kind of reluctant maturity. And then, those wounds, rather than fading, morphed into personality traits. The one who was abandoned learns to live alone. The one who was belittled becomes obsessed with achievement. The one who was never heard grows silent and distant. These are not inborn traits. They are unconscious shells built for survival. Jung called this the false self, a mask the ego creates when our true self feels unacceptable. We slowly forget who we once were, what we once loved, what we once dreamed of. Everything is replaced by roles we think society will find more acceptable. But behind that exterior lies an exhaustion we cannot name, a feeling of always living but never really being alive, a hollowness after each success. Because deep down, we know this was never truly ours. To realize that much of what we call personality is actually the consequence of trauma is not to blame ourselves. It is to begin the journey of peeling back the masks, returning to our intact self. Only by understanding how we've changed can we hope to find our way back to who we truly are, strong enough to be isolated. The cost of absolute independence. Some people learn very early. Dependence is dangerous. Trusting leads to hurt. Relying on someone only sets you up for disappointment. So they choose to do everything alone. They push themselves to become the person who needs no one. Strong, decisive, resilient. From the outside, they seem in control, but inside, they are exhausted. Excessive independence is not a sign of maturity. It's the mark of a wound that has never been healed. Jung described this as the ego's survival mechanism in a world once too unsafe, where living authentically was impossible when someone has been rejected, hurt, or betrayed at their most vulnerable. They build a fortress not to live comfortably, but to survive. That fortress is extreme self-reliance. Outsiders admire it, but the one inside is simply trying not to collapse. They avoid showing pain, afraid they'll seem weak. They don't ask for comfort because they've forgotten what comfort feels like. And over time, they grow skilled at separating emotions from relationships, even the ones they truly need. Control, coldness, decisiveness are often just defense mechanisms, disguised as strength. But inside is a heart that no longer remembers how to be held. This kind of self-reliance isn't freedom. It's a prison where the jailer is also the prisoner. What's worse, the world unintentionally reinforces it when someone that appears strong. No one asks further. They assume that person needs no help, but no one can be strong forever. No one should have to carry everything alone sometimes. The bravest thing isn't standing on your own, but letting someone in to walk beside you. When empathy becomes a survival strategy, some people are born with sensitive hearts, but others become sensitive because of their wounds as children. If they grow up in unstable environments where emotions swing unpredictably and anger can erupt, at any moment they learn to read the room to survive. They know when to stay silent, when to retreat. They sense moods from glances, tones of voice, even threatening silences. This kind of empathy doesn't stem from love, it stems from fear. And over the years, these individuals grow up with a heightened ability to sense others, but struggle to identify their own feelings. They care for others before understanding what's going on inside themselves. They become the dependable one, the listener, the comforter, the one who carries the group's emotions. They're so used to helping others heal. They forget they too need healing. They believe their existence only matters if they're useful. They feel invisible when they're no longer needed. And so, empathy, once a gift, becomes a burden. Carl Jung called this projection. When we place onto others parts of ourselves, we're not ready to face people who over-empathize, are often trying to heal their own pain through caring for others. But this doesn't truly work, because no one can fill their inner void with emotions from outside. Worse, this kind of empathy often leads to imbalanced relationships, where they give unconditionally and receive very little. They don't know how to set boundaries, to say no, to let someone down, because deep down, they fear, if I'm not helpful, I won't be loved. What they need is not to become less feeling, but to turn their empathy inward, to place a hand on their heart, breathe deeply, and ask, what am I feeling? Because compassion only holds true value when it begins within. When you are brave enough to listen to yourself first, your listening to others becomes love, not fear in disguise. Love makes the wounded hesitate. Some people don't love less, they just love more carefully, not because their hearts are cold, but because they once shattered in the very place that was supposed to feel safe for them. Love is no longer a refuge, but a danger zone. Every tender gesture is scrutinized. Every kind word is doubted. They may love deeply, but always hold back, a part no one can reach. When someone is abandoned, at their most vulnerable, the mind doesn't forget, even if years have passed. Even if the new person is nothing like the old, the unconscious still echoes with fear. It could happen again. So love arrives, but not with the innocence it once had. It comes with hesitation, anxiety, and a silent urge to control. Carl Jung once said, unconscious complexes take over when we are unaware of them in love. This shows up as jealousy that seems irrational, sudden withdrawal, or the urge to leave, even when things are calm. Outsiders may see this as instability, but in truth, it's the inner child trying to protect itself from a pain it once knew too well. The wounded lover is always asking, "Can I trust you? Will you leave? Are you real?" They analyze every detail, eye contact, tone, reply time, not out of suspicion, but because their wound was never truly healed. And so, love becomes a silent battlefield where one longs for closeness but fears loss, where a warm hug can awaken abandonment, where a single doubt can unleash a flood of old emotions. But here's the truth. Not everyone who hesitates in love wants to avoid it. In fact, they crave it more than anyone. They just don't know how to trust again. And what they need isn't perfection, but patience. If you're loving someone whose soul has been broken, don't rush them to open up. Stay long enough for them to believe that this time, love isn't here to hurt, but to stay. And if you are the one who hesitates, remember, not everyone will leave. Some people come to show you that love isn't a trap. It's the path back to healing, the mask of strength, and the silent collapse. Have you ever been told you're strong? Chances are that wasn't a comfort, it was a sign you've become too good at hiding. Many people become symbols of resilience, not because they don't feel pain, but because they refuse to fall apart in front of others. When the world around them collapses, they're the first to rise. When someone cries, they hand out tissues, but when night falls, they're the only ones with no one to lean on. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social mask a shell people wear to fulfill the roles life assigns them. For some, that mask is strength. It's a smile in the middle of a storm. It's shoulders always ready to carry the burden. But what no one sees is the heart behind it. A heart that has wanted to give up many times. The strength they show isn't a choice, it's a necessity. As children, no one asked them how they felt. They had to grow up too quickly. They became adults while still children. And so, emotions were pushed aside. The need for comfort, love, and vulnerability was treated as a luxury they couldn't afford. As they grew, they continued the performance. They didn't dare say, "I'm tired today." They didn't know how to ask for help. They became so good at enduring that the whole world believed they were fine, and because of that, no one came when they truly needed someone. But wearing a mask for too long has a cost. On the outside is control. On the inside is a slow, silent breaking. They don't collapse in public, they fall apart in silence, in the bathroom, on the bed, or along a quiet road home. The most dangerous thing is, they've grown so used to loneliness that they no longer believe they deserve to be checked on. They've detached from their own emotions. Thinking to be strong means never letting yourself break. But real strength isn't about holding it together endlessly. True strength is being able to say, "I'm not okay," and believing that someone will stay anyway. Healing begins when we loosen the mask, when we let ourselves be tired, be hurt, be held. Because humans weren't born to be fortresses, we were born to connect, to feel, to be real, both in our strength and in our softness. When the body still remembers the fear the mind has forgotten, some wounds don't live in memories or stories, they live in the body. People who've endured deep psychological trauma often carry a nervous system that never truly rests. They live in a constant state of alert, as if danger is always near, even when nothing is threatening them anymore. Their heart races, breath shortens, palms sweat, mind fogs for no clear reason. Others may call them too sensitive or overreactive, but to them, everything feels too much. Loud noises, bright lights, crowded spaces, unexpected contact. A party can leave them exhausted. A short conversation may echo in them all day. They don't know why. They react that way, they just know they can't help it. Carl Jung once said, "What is not brought to consciousness comes back as fate." For those raised in unstable environments, where safety was rare, their bodies learn to survive by constantly reacting to every signal, even when the danger is gone. Their bodies haven't forgotten. They carry the memory of emotions that were never released, like a wound that was never bandaged. The saddest part is that because this pain is invisible, it's often misunderstood. They're seen as too fragile, difficult, or worse, broken. But the truth is, they're living with a nervous system worn down by fear. They don't want to run, they've just never been taught how to stand still without being afraid. Unprocessed emotions will find expression through the body. That's why grief may show up as headaches, anxiety as stomach pain, repressed anger as numbness. The body is where the soul speaks what was never heard. Healing doesn't begin with mastering every emotion. It begins by admitting, "I once lived in a world where I didn't feel safe. I'm allowed to be tired. I'm allowed to step away from what overwhelms me. I don't need to justify every feeling I have." Recovery doesn't come from enduring better. It comes when we believe, this body deserves love, these emotions deserve to be heard, and this past, no matter how dark, no longer gets to rule the present. When the body is listened to, the mind can finally rest, and then life stops being a battle and becomes a journey back to peace. Control isn't about power, it's about past powerlessness. Many people carry an obsession with controlling everything. They plan meticulously, anticipate every risk, scrutinize every detail from meals to conversations to every step of their workday. Everything must stay within a zone of absolute safety. Outsiders may call them perfectionists, difficult, or power-hungry, but behind those controlling behaviors lies a quiet fear, the fear of chaos. Carl Jung once said, "The ego tries to control what the unconscious cannot yet face." For those who've experienced sudden trauma or loss, losing control becomes a nightmare. Maybe they grew up in an unstable household, were betrayed, or lost someone without warning. Each experience left a scar. If I don't control it, everything might collapse. And so, the mind reacts. They prepare for every worst-case scenario. They never feel at ease unless they handle things themselves. They don't trust others to do it right, but they don't realize that their tension is slowly draining their spirit. Excessive control doesn't make life safer, it only makes it harder to let go. They stay on high alert, never truly resting. And even when things go fine, they're still bracing for something bad to happen. Healing here doesn't mean suddenly letting go of everything. It means gradually learning to trust again, trusting your own ability to cope when things go wrong, instead of controlling everything up front, believing that some things are outside your control, and that's okay. Above all, believing, "I'm not living in the past anymore. This present moment is a chance to live lighter, gentler." And it begins with releasing control. Just a little is enough. Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's a sanctuary. Some people love silence, not because they hate society, but because it's the only place they can truly breathe after years of living in tension, anxiety, conflict. Quiet becomes a luxury they long for. They withdraw from loud conversations, avoid overly intense relationships, not because they're cold, but because they're tired of pretending to fit in. Carl Jung saw retreat as a vital part of inner transformation, a kind of symbolic death before rebirth. For those who've endured much pain, silence is not emptiness. It's where they go to heal, a space free of judgment, expectation, or pressure to be someone else. But that silence walks a fine line. If it lasts too long without connection, it can turn into isolation, When others don't understand, they assume you're indifferent, cold. They walk away, and the loneliness grows. You forget how to open up, and eventually, the place that once sheltered you becomes a cage. Those who've been hurt often don't want to talk much. They don't want to explain their emotions to someone who won't be patient enough to understand. They need space, but also someone gentle enough to sit beside them, asking nothing, just being there, not forcing words, not making them feel guilty for going quiet. Silence doesn't need to be broken. It needs to be respected. But it also needs a door, so when the time comes, the person can open it and step into the light. Because even the safest sanctuary, if locked too long, becomes suffocating. Healing is learning how to step into silence to recover, but also finding the courage to step back out. Once your heart feels a little lighter, no one can live in the dark forever. Stillness is medicine, but connection is life. The heart can love. Even while it stays locked, a heart that's been deeply wounded doesn't open easily. It hasn't lost the ability to love. It's just learned to love with caution. On the outside, the person may laugh, chat, even seem open, but inside, there's always a door that never fully opens. Part of them always wonders, is it safe this time? So, even while longing for closeness, they keep their distance. They analyze every word, examine every small action. A delayed message can keep them awake. A distracted glance can trigger their guard, not because they're petty, but because deep inside lives the memory of a past that shattered without warning. Carl Jung emphasized the unconscious doesn't distinguish past from present, it simply reacts when touched. So, someone who has been hurt once will always live as if that pain could happen again. They don't choose to be guarded. It once saved them, but that defense comes at a cost. It makes love tiring when feelings are filtered. When trust is postponed, love can't flow freely. They're not rejecting love. They just don't know how to believe in it again without losing themselves. And the bitter irony is that those who are most guarded often love the deepest. They long to be seen, held, healed, but don't know how to open their hearts. They fear being too much, too sensitive, too complicated. They isolate their hearts, then blame themselves for feeling alone. Healing doesn't mean flinging the doors wide open sometimes. It's just cracking them a little, letting someone glimpse your soft places without fear. Learning to love slowly, not rushing, but not retreating forever. Your heart doesn't have to be fully strong to love. It only needs to believe that this time, love isn't here to hurt, but to heal alongside you. And that belief, no matter how fragile, is the first step to real love. When injustice becomes a moral trigger, someone who has experienced deep injustice will never remain indifferent to the world. They notice disrespect where others overlook it. They sense hidden pain behind a word, a glance, an offhand gesture, and when they react, outsiders might say they are too sensitive, too intense, or overreacting. But, in truth, it's an old wound being touched. Carl Jung explained that unprocessed wounds will react when present situations resemble painful past memories. For those who've been mistreated, humiliated, or silenced into injustice, standing up for themselves or others is not just a moral action, it's survival. They can't look away, can't stay silent, because they know how deeply it hurts to be abandoned in the face of injustice. These individuals often become fierce defenders of what is right. They debate strongly, uncompromisingly when confronted with wrongdoing, not because they enjoy conflict, but because no one stood up for them when they needed it. Now, they've become the person they once needed. However, if they are unaware that their anger stems from unhealed wounds, they may go too far. When righteousness is rooted in unresolved pain, It can become extreme and unrestrained. Protection can turn into attack, and justice into judgment. Healing does not mean overlooking what's wrong, but it allows us to respond from peace, not from pain. Those who were once trampled can become symbols of justice if they do not let pain lead the way. More importantly, they can become a safe haven for others, not with shouting, but with steady eyes and a heart that has found calm. Sensitivity to injustice is a gift when it's grounded. It helps us protect what's right, but also reminds us not every wrong must be fought sometimes. Quiet kindness is the most powerful act. That's when old pain no longer rules, but becomes a guide. You see others' pain because you've been there. Some people can sense another's sadness without a single word spoken. They see the weariness behind a smile, hear the silence in a "I'm fine." It's not telepathy, they've just been there before. They once suffered in silence, and now they instantly recognize the muffled sigh someone else is trying to hide. Carl Jung once said, "When we make peace with our own darkness, we better understand the darkness of others." Those who've endured much often develop a special sensitivity, not weakness, but an emotional radar. They walk into a room and feel the atmosphere. They know when someone needs a hug, to be left alone, or simply met with a non-judgmental gaze. But this empathy is a double-edged sword, because they are so attuned to others' emotions. They often forget themselves. They burn out easily, feel invisible when they're not helping. They exist as healers, yet rarely ask to be healed. True healing is when you can still perceive another's sorrow, but not dissolve into it. When you learn how to stand beside someone without losing yourself. Because the most valuable thing a wounded soul can offer is not advice, it's full, compassionate presence. Living in guilt, the fear of being a burden. Some people constantly apologize even when they've done nothing wrong. They pull back their words, shrink their behavior, always defer, just so they won't be too much for others. They live in a state of constant guilt, as if their very existence is a burden that must be made smaller. They don't dare ask, complain, or express emotions for fear of being labeled a nuisance. This fear isn't random. It often begins early, when their emotions were once invalidated, when they cried and were told they were overreacting, when they needed comfort but were met with silence over time. They learned, my feelings are wrong. They make others uncomfortable, so they hid everything, including themselves. Carl Jung called this the unconscious guilt complex, a deep-rooted shame for simply existing. People who carry this constantly try to prove they are worthy of love, worthy of being kept, even though no one asked them to, but that effort pulls them further from their true feelings. Healing begins when we dare to say, I have the right to be here. When we stop apologizing for our true emotions, when we understand needing care is not weakness, and being tired is not wrong. We don't need to shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort zone, because our existence as it is already enough. When pain becomes purpose, some pain once felt impossible to overcome, but one day, you look back and realize you're still here, not just surviving, but living. And from those very cracks, something begins to sprout, the search for meaning, not to forget the past, but to transform it into something greater than pain. Many people, after surviving deep crisis, begin to feel a calling. I can't let what happened be meaningless. They begin to write, share, help, heal, not to prove anything, but because they deeply understand what it feels like to be lost, alone, hopeless. They don't want anyone else to go through the dark alone as they did. Carl Jung called this the beginning of individuation, when a person stops living in reactive instinct and starts living with inner direction, when the wound is no longer a weight, but a compass. And then, you see, the thing that once broke you is now what helps you rise and move forward. Purpose doesn't have to be grand sometimes. It's simply, I will become the person I once needed. And from there, you are no longer someone carrying trauma. You are someone transforming it. Not merely surviving, but living with meaning, with depth, with gratitude. And that is true rebirth. The healing journey doesn't begin with strength, but with permission. We often think healing requires strength, that we must get over it quickly, be fine soon, so we don't burden anyone. But in truth, healing begins not with strength, but with a soft whisper inside. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to hurt. For many who have endured too much, allowing themselves to be vulnerable is the hardest part. They're used to powering through, used to playing the strong one, used to caring for others while forgetting themselves. But healing doesn't come from enduring, it comes from relearning how to care for yourself like a forgotten child. Carl Jung once said, "You cannot become light without first facing your darkness." Recovery doesn't come from denying feelings, but from courageously facing them with gentleness, not judgment. And slowly, you'll learn. Resting is not weakness. Crying is not wrong. Slowing down doesn't mean failure. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You only need to be honest about what's happening inside you. Healing is not a destination. It's a compassionate journey you take each day when you begin, treating yourself with the patience, empathy, and love you've long deserved. You are not wrong for being different. Prejudice is not truth. Society often imposes rigid molds. Adults must be strong, hide emotions, stay cheerful, and always be in control. Those who don't fit, those who are sensitive, thoughtful, easily fatigued are quickly labeled as weak, negative, or in need of fixing. But the truth is, you are not wrong for being different. You are not wrong for feeling more deeply than others. Many people with trauma spend their lives ashamed, trying to fit into standards that never felt natural. They stay silent when they want to cry. They smile with empty hearts. They pretend to be okay just to avoid judgment. But this only takes them further from themselves. Carl Jung once emphasized, what makes you different is what makes you real. The very traits seen as flaws, sensitivity, quietness, overthinking, are signs of inner depth. The world just hasn't yet learned how to value them properly. Healing begins when you pause, look in the mirror, and say, I don't have to be like anyone else. When you start to understand, softness does not equal weakness, and difference is not something to fix, but something to understand. Challenging social prejudice isn't about defiance. It's about loyalty to yourself. Because once you fully accept who you are, you don't just heal. You help others find the courage to be true too. And the world, little by little, becomes gentler because of the truth you bring into it. You are not just what hurt you. You've walked through pain. You've carried invisible scars. You've stayed silent when you wanted to scream. You've smiled when all you wanted was to fall apart. But you're still here, and that means within you is a quiet strength, not loud, not boastful, but deeply steady. You don't need to rush to become someone new or better. You only need to slowly return to yourself, because deep within every wound is a part of your soul waiting to be embraced, accepted, and loved without needing to prove anything. Carl Jung once said, "The tree that reaches to heaven must have roots that reach into hell." The pain you've endured does not make you worse, it makes you more real, more profound, more human. And if you're still walking this healing path, still navigating the ruins that haven't closed, remember, you are not alone. Every step you take, no matter how slow, is your way of saying you are still choosing life. And that is the bravest thing of all.